Hello and welcome to the Womxn Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and today we are coming to you in a new season from a new set, but with the same great conversations we've always had, interrogating gender-based violence and gender justice. In today's episode, we are speaking to the Trauma Centre for Survivors of Violence and Torture. Now, the Trauma Centre has a long history in Cape Town. It was launched in 1993 in response to the Truth and Reconciliation campaign to provide counselling and healing for victims of political violence. They have just celebrated their 30th birthday, and their work has evolved to dealing with survivors of violence in communities, of domestic violence, of child abuse, and a lot more. After the break, we're going to be speaking to the Trauma Centre about their work in communities. But before that, we're going to have a look at a short video that showcases the work that they do. Let's have a look.
Trauma Centre, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Centre. Happy birthday to you.
I am Shana Fernandez, the Minister for Social Development in the Western Cape Government, and we are here today to celebrate a 30-year milestone. The Trauma Centre is celebrating 30 years of healing work in our communities, not only in the Western Cape, but in South Africa.
Hello, my name is Regan Allen. I serve as the Provincial Minister responsible for police oversight and community safety in the Western Cape. I'm so delighted to be partaking here tonight, considering that it has been 30 years since the Trauma Centre has been established, and they have impacted the lives of so many.
This journey of life that all of us are on, it's a very important journey. There's a very important quote that I subscribe to by Henry Hunt that says, "Success is when preparation meets opportunity."
There's a lot of words going around we all experience trauma. Now we all experience we all undergo traumatic experiences, but not everyone develop trauma.
Our society in the Western Cape, or in Cape Town in particular, would be poor without the Trauma Centre.
We believe and we know that we are the voice of the voiceless.
That was a short video showcasing the work of the Trauma Centre. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching the Womxn Show, and we are back, as you can see, with our new look, a new season, but the same great conversations. And today we are in studio with Marguerite Holzthausen, who is the Director and Lead Social Worker at the Trauma Centre for Survivors for Violence and Torture. I had to read that and make sure I say it correctly, because Marguerite was saying we often get it wrong. Marguerite, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lenina, for having me here today. It's really an honor.
I am so honored to be here with you representing an organization that's been around for 30 years. The Trauma Center had its 30th anniversary / birthday last year. We have been providing a service in terms of counseling and a lot more, and working towards building a society of non-violence. And so we're very honored to have you here. And I think, what our conversation is going to be about today is also South Africa is a country with high levels of violence. And it's about how do we situate ourselves within this situation of violence that a lot of people live in, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, in their communities, sometimes in their homes. But before we speak about all of that, Marguerite, I do want to go into some context and history about the Trauma Center. Now, it was launched in 1993, and it was in response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to provide healing and counseling services to victims of torture and violence, primarily during apartheid. Can you tell us more about it?
Yes, we actually, our offices are situated in Cowley House, which is in Woodstock, and although the Trauma Center was founded in 1993 to provide those services to victims of apartheid and their families, the space that we occupy is also very special, and we draw strength from the history. In the 70s and the 80s, a lot of family of political prisoners resided there when they visited their family who were incarcerated in on Robben Island. So we know that the likes of Winnie Mandela and Albertina Sisulu, they stayed there where we worked on a daily basis. And the courage of those historic figures inspire us also to keep on working towards a non-violent society, to honor also what they've sacrificed for us to be where we are today.
That's a beautiful legacy. And I can imagine that the energy from that space, from those survivors and from those stalwarts of the apartheid time and era, lives there and informs the work also. Marguerite, I want to ask, there was a very specific purpose of the Trauma Center when it launched. And the TRC is often held up as this beacon of a peaceful transition from a very violent, oppressive society to the new South Africa. There were specific forms of violence, that the Trauma Center, I suppose, was going to deal with, as you said, survivors and victims of apartheid violence and their families. How is the Trauma Center, now it's been 30 years, right?
Yes.
How has the Trauma Center evolved from that space of providing, I think, healing to survivors of largely political violence? What does it look like now?
So we still experience the effect of that structural violence. It's still not all finished. We know we have still a very high inequality in our communities, and there's still a lot of intergenerational trauma that we deal with today. We find that South Africans really easily resort to violence when there's conflict. If you look at the reasons why murders are committed in this country, in the police reports, they do analysis of that. Often it's arguments, it's disagreements, it's revenge. And so violence is still very much a problem in our communities, and it stems from also our history. We can't look at violence and the crime we see today in isolation from the context of our history. And recently the Global Crime Index came out, and Pretoria was number 2, Joburg was number 3, Cape Town was number 18. But if you look at the numbers of the index, it's not much difference. But we're regarded as some of the highest crime stats in the world. So it's really concerning, and we do a lot of work with victims of crime these days and victims of gender-based violence. We are happy to say that not so much torture as before. torture victims, but there are still torture victims. We still counsel torture victims from time to time, but it is mostly victims of crime and victims of gender-based violence.
And I would venture to say that often we hear of torture falling within those two categories. And I was actually doing a lot of reading the other day. We're going to speak about gender-based violence, but I want to say, I was reading the other day where gender-based violence is often, or domestic violence can often be referred to in itself as torture because it happens over a long period of time.
Yes, I think the definition, we are part of an international Council for Rehabilitation of Torture Victims, and they have a very specific definition of torture that it's state-inflicted. Okay. But we've made a case that really sometimes the way that our victims of gender-based violence are treated by state, how often, and I mean, we've been fighting this fight. I mean, I've been here now at the trauma center since 2020, and we still get cases where police send people who come and report violence, gender-based violence, send them home. We still get that inaction. For me is also a kind of a violence. And because their rights are not upheld. No, they're not, they actually basically sent back to be abused again. And sometimes I'm thinking what happens at because we most of the trauma center staff do counselling at the back of police stations. So I often wonder where trauma center is not. There's really nobody who can stand up for those victims. So we sometimes have to go to the station commander, go back to the police officer. If we don't get results, or it's like, we go to IPIT and we report police. But generally, we have like a good relationship with the police station. I think they also realize we keep them on their toes and we help them to do better. Yeah. So it's not that we are in a negative relation with them, but we do have to stand up for victims. We often have to advocate on an individual basis for victims who report, especially gender-based violence at police stations.
And you raise these very important points. I want to ask you when you say, we have to ensure that our you're often doing advocacy because the rights are not upheld. Yeah. And so starting from a space of non-violence, right? These rights, the right to live a life free from violence is embedded in our Constitution. Yes. So if we're not down the exact, we're not there. No, exactly. So you know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, so if we start there, we start from a rights-based space. Yes. What does the Constitution say about if you know the wording, because I didn't write it down.
I can't say it to you verbatim. Okay. But we have a right to safety. Yeah. The children's rights also say children has a right to safety and to be free from abuse. Yes. And we also know how domestic violence, not only physically, but emotionally impact on children. Yes. I mean, just to give you some practical examples, when we did our show, we do a show to raise awareness on domestic violence and also to give communities also information on what can be done and what we can do to work towards healing, and also to stimulate discussion around these topics, and not just to accept this is how it is. So when we did that, we had young people standing up in the audience saying, "This is my life. This is what I go through on a daily basis," and saying that, it encouraged them to see that they're not alone and that they can look for something else, they can stand up, they can speak out. So we hope we can do more of that. It's really so needed, so that we can work with communities to find solutions. We can't do it on our own. We can't dip into a community as trauma center and fix the problems. We need to work hand in hand with communities, and not only us, also our government needs to work more closely with communities to find solutions, because that is really lacking, in my opinion.
No, exactly. I had these two questions and they're related, and I sort of want to just punch them into one. You said earlier, you were speaking about how violence has become so normalized. Yeah. Right? We have this long history of violence. And specifically what was so interesting is you said a lot of murders, when you dig deep into the statistics, as the reason behind those murders, we see a lot of it's arguments, it's disagreements, it's revenge, it's like sort of these everyday
even more than
situations.
gang violence, even more
than gang
so
violence.
that is also feeding also another category, but those arguments are over and above separately counted from gang violence. So it just shows it's between people in their daily going about doing their things in their homes, on the streets, among friends. Violence happens.
So let's talk about, I want you to talk about what violence looks like, because we have these categories now. We have these disagreements, we have arguments, we have revenge, and by itself, these things are normal human things. We're not gonna, we're not gonna have a country or a society of non-violence where arguments never happen.
But I'm talking about those things that's the cause of murders.
Yes, so that's what I want to ask you. So I guess I'm looking for some broad definition. So when we think about violence being so normalized, sometimes to a degree where we don't recognize it as something that is wrong, right? So we think about police officers saying, "Oh no, go back home." That's not a crime. What does violence look like? Can we think about then, if we wanted to think about violence as something, as a crime, as something that is wrong, if we wanted to just like open up a little bit?
So when we think of violence, we always think of physical violence. We think of the words that I spoke now about, like the most, you definitely know it happened if somebody's murdered, violence happened. But if you look at, for example, the Domestic Violence Act, the amended one that came out recently, it's much broader. It speaks to domestic violence, speaks to physical violence, it speaks to emotional violence, it speaks to economical violence. When for example, in a household, some members of the family are with economic means are withheld from them. So we often get maybe the children and the mothers struggling to survive, but there is money in the house, but it doesn't get to them. And that's a way of punishment, a way of control. And then even what was added, very interesting, is spiritual violence, where faith is used as a tool to control, to belittle, to keep power away, to keep, to withhold just the normal right to thrive and to just to be able to do things, to say, I'm the head of the household, so you will do this and that, which, if you really read the context of those kind of, if you go into the context of in the Bible of where that line is, it's not defined in that way, that now I'm going to lay my hands on you because I'm the head of the house. That was not if you want to go back into the theology of it, that was not what was meant when it was said the man is the head of the household. But it's it takes faith and religion and use it as a weapon of one party against the other. And I specifically say one party against the other because especially in Cape Town, we've had a lot of conversations with men, where men also feel they are being emotionally abused. They are being looked down because maybe they're unemployed and they feel they're just not regarded. So it's not only women, mostly women, and especially when it comes to the physical violence, obviously because men are stronger than women, women are mostly the victims. But it doesn't mean that men can't also be victims.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, that is so important. When we think about violence, you're speaking about sort of using certain things as a weapon, using religion as a weapon, one party against another. I was doing some research, obviously, before this interview, and I was looking at violence. I was just looking at violence, what are the roots of violence, etc. And this thing that came up all of the time from international sort of wars and violence right down to domestic violence in the home is this issue of power and control.
Absolutely.
And having power over another party or another country or
another community.
And trying to control them. And do you see that as a root of violence?
Definitely, there's definitely a link. What I also didn't mention, how there's obviously sexual violence, we all know about that, how sex is used to control rape, but not only rape, sexual harassment, those more subtle ways of controlling somebody. But also we must look at the unseen forms of violence. They're often overlooked. Violence that you live in a environment where you don't have support to raise your children, for example. You have to go to work and leave your children alone because you have nobody to look after them. There's no support in terms of childcare, those kind of structural issues that impacts on family life and can lead to great harm and tragedy, So we often just focus on the physical manifestation, and I think that is also sometimes a problem with our generally, not only in South Africa, but government's response to violence is to say, let's just stop the criminals. Let's get more technology and more bodies on the street to fight violence, but nobody thinks of where does this all come from. We do a workshop where we look at a tree almost as a symbol for a problem, and then the roots. What's the roots of the problem? Let's dig a bit deeper and look, what is the roots of this problem that's manifesting in crime, gangsterism, violence, domestic violence? Where does it all come from? And how do we address those unseen elements that is there that leads to this physical manifestation of violence? And which crime is unfortunately also just a very much in our faces, and often linked to violence.
We have to go to a break in like 2 minutes, but that's a really interesting exercise. I want to ask you quickly 3 things that come up when people talk about roots. So if you're doing the workshop, and people have to come up with, like, what do they think the roots are? What do they often come up with?
People mention poverty. Mm-hmm. They mention families. They mention broken families. I've even have children that said, the reason why a girl is more susceptible to become a girlfriend of a gangster is because maybe she doesn't get the attention at home. And other families said, children are often disciplined harsher, which alienate them. And then people also mention just communication, that we don't know how to communicate. And then in our cultures before, we had more support, in the African culture. Some of the participants in workshop, African participants would say, before they had kind of a support from elders to resolve conflict. That's not there anymore, and sometimes young people don't want it anymore. But then it's my will against your will, and we'll see who's going to win this battle. So there's no way of, a little bit of lack of support and wisdom. And other cultures, again, the church played a role, and they were more of a social capital that would support. But now it's like my will against your will, that communication challenges.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Marguerite, we have to take a short break, but we will be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching the Womxn Show, and we are in studio with the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture, and we're talking about violence. South Africa is a very violent society, and what does the lived reality look like in terms of us having to navigate all of that? And still with me in studio is Marguerite Holzthausen, who is the director and lead social worker at the Trauma Center, and then we are also joined by Qhamisa Jama, who is a community organizer at the Trauma Center, and he's going to tell us about some of the work that he's been doing in Delft. But before we go to that, Marguerite, I want to continue from where we left off. You know, one of the things that you brought in during the break while we were chatting was that you've spoken about the work that the trauma center does and the counseling and the healing that is required, but you said something. You said we can counsel until we're blue in the face, but we also need to address the root causes of violence, and some of that is doing prevention work. So can you just tell us, I think, a little bit about what does prevention work entail? What does it look like? What do we need to be doing that we are not doing?
One of my staff members, actually the finance administrator, had a very nice, like a simile, not simile, example. For example, you have a tap that's running, and now to solve the problem, you're mopping, and you're mopping, and you're mopping. But somewhere we have to close the tap on gender-based violence, to look at what are the things that we can do to prevent it. Because we need to help our victims and get them to become survivors and to get on with their lives and to thrive again. But that is only part of what we need to do. We also need to start preventing more women to go through that. You know, some of my social workers have told me when I started already, Marguerite, we can't do this forever. It's too terrible, the things we have to hear. And what do we do to prevent this from happening? And part of it is training, education. We do training of community support workers to be the eyes and ears of trauma center and other NGOs, social workers and psychologists, because we can't reach everybody. But that lady in the street who everybody knows, who is caring, she can give that support. She can refer somebody early stage to get help before it gets to the point where somebody is really harmed to a great extent, and then it takes so much. It takes so much to get somebody to heal. You know, why don't we just work at preventing? But we know that funders and government are not often keen on funding prevention because it's for them too wishy-washy. They don't know if it's going to work. They would rather say, you know, we help so many women who've been victims of gender-based violence. Yeah, but we really need to start looking at what are the determinants of violence, of gender-based violence, of sexual violence. And if we look at the research, it links to childhood trauma. So my question is also, what are we doing to support children? We have in schools, there's one social worker for 20 schools. I would say every school needs a social worker to help children, because if you deal with issues at a young age, it will prevent them from one day growing up and getting into that evil cycle of violence, you know, where it goes from one generation to the next.
And that's where I wanted to come in. Actually, I wanted to say, you know, using your finance manager's analogy, this tap has been leaking for a long, long time.
In a bad way.
So in a bad way. And so we almost have these kids, children for generations now, being born into this flooded house. I'm taking it very far now, but I'm just saying the house is flooding.
It's a nice
and
image.
The kids are being born into this flooded house, right? And so we need to, and you can bail out the water as much as you want, but it just keeps refilling. And so I want to move to you, Qhamisa, and just to say, you know, what does some of it look like? What is addressing that tap, that leak look like? You were doing some work in Delft. You were doing some work with young people, right? And I want to say this is young people who have already been exposed to violence, a lot of them, right? So tell us about some of the prevention work that you were doing there.
So what we did last year when the prevention program was continuing, we asked the children that they should write stories that they have experienced or they relate to. So one of the stories that we did was about their stories. So we mixed them and made it a whole play. So for them. So to show the community, we didn't cook up this thing. It's not some made up stories. It's stories from the community, from the children, what they experience in their household, in their neighbors. So we have been doing that. the last year, 2021, when the program was happening, we took stats from the police station. We did research about these things because we don't want to come up with things. No, we are talking about real things that are happening in our community. So we do that in a form of a play, because sometimes to like talk it, like sit and talk to people, they won't listen. But when they see these things, when they see it happening, and more especially when it's done by young children, it becomes more interesting to see that this is a problem. If we don't stop it now, it's going to become more of a problem, because these children grow up under these things. You know, some are victims of these in our program, like the kids there. Some of them are victims to gender-based violence, are victim to that. So as Marguerite has mentioned here about the social workers, we do take those children to the social workers too, and they have group sessions with them, you know, because sometimes it can be training for them. So yeah, this prevention program, we want to address the root cause, as Margaret said, to close that tab, because we cannot always mopping. We must go there and say, where is the problem coming from, so that we can start addressing the problem there, and then after addressing that problem, we go to mop now. So we are able to do the proper mopping.
Can I say that this is also so innovative, and an innovative approach to dealing with this topic, because it's not just like difficult to listen to these things. For kids, it's often dangerous it's not allowed, you know, you're not supposed to go out and speak. We know domestic violence is a culture of silence, right? Or violence in itself is a culture of silence, so is sexual violence, etc. So they are not supposed to speak about it, and often there's a danger to it. There's a potential punishment if they go and they talk about what's happening inside the house. And so you've come up with a very innovative way, a safe space, and also using the play as a way for them to speak. But how do they feel? I want to ask about the shift that happens when someone is able to talk about a trauma. Do you see that there's a shift when they're in a space and they can finally like say these things or write these things or act out these things?
Yes, they do. Yes, we offer that safe space, and also like we do measurements on our shows to check the audience behavior towards gender-based violence or understanding. So at first we ask them certain questions before the show starts, and then in our interval when we are transitioning, we ask them again, and then at the end of the show, we ask them the same questions that you asked to check if there was an understanding. And according to our analysis in what the audience has answered, there was a change.
Oh wow! Can you tell us? I mean, can you just off the top of your head, what are some of the biggest shifts that you have seen?
Okay, it was when we asked if a man is supposed to be the head of the household. Is a man supposed to, is always, and then at first there was like yes, but at the end less yeses were there, because we have people who are single mothers. There's no dad there. There's no man there. That woman is the head of that household.
And so even the perception of that, because you can have a single mother, but you don't perceive her to be a head of the household. You would rather perceive maybe the house to be deficient, and not have a head.
Yes,
that's interesting.
And also in the story, the father is struggling. He's really struggling with his life. Because of his own abuse he experienced as a child. So he's not in a position to lead. He's first have to work and find some healing before he can be effective as a leader. So at that point, other people had to lead to help him. So yeah, and then what I also love about what they've done is Qhamisa and Temba, a social worker with also a bit of theatre background, what they did is they also brought in the themes of the LGBTQI plus community. There's a young person saying, you know, I am a gay person, and you know, why can't you just love me for who I am? It's so powerful. And our communities love the performing arts, and our young people are extremely talented. Qhamisa can maybe tell you also about some of the young people who were in the play in 2021, 2022, got work in the film industry. So it's actually like job creation. And the parents told us that the children are doing better in English in school because they practice speaking, and a lot of the plays in English, but there's also some Afrikaans and Xhosa because that's a community of Delft.
And so it services a lot of areas, and then also
it has a knock-on effect, unintended
as a form of therapy,
outcomes.
right? So we're talking about these things and being able to tell the story. I know for me in the work that I do, I was very confused in the beginning where people will say, "Oh, you know, you're very brave. You say these things," and I'm like, "But I'm just talking," and then I realized that, you know, verbalizing and talking and saying certain painful things is a really difficult thing to do, and that sometimes when you say something, you can say it for someone else, or the power of someone seeing their experience reflected on stage, for example, right?
And also, like, we didn't only include the LGBTQI plus community, we also included the always excluded, which is the disability. You know, so we have a man who's fighting for them in Delft, which is his name is Shafiq, but he helped me to recruit those with a disability. So we include them all, you know, which is the LGBTQI plus community and the people with disabilities. But Margaret once said, we must not say that there are people with disability. If they can do what we do, they are not disabled.
Yeah.
So we for now, just not to confuse people, we just say people with disabilities. We included them, and they also have painful stories behind them. You know,
we often forget about the deeper vulnerability,
more vulnerable
to violence and to gender-based violence.
Yes, they are. Yeah, one of our kids was also like bullied at school, so he's proud to talk about that. He's proud to talk about that. That's what encourages me. He encourages me, you know, a lot, because he's just very. He's just living like a normal person. And when he got to our program, he was a shy person, very, very shy person. He was not a person who's gonna interact. But when he got there, he just improved. He just started to show us his talent. I didn't even know he can sing. He can sing so well. I didn't know if he can dance. Nobody has ever like asked him to dance, but he's dancing for us. He's the one who closes the show for us. If you guys can come and see, you're going to see how well he dances. And I'm like, nobody knew about this thing. So this program is not only about addressing the ills of gender-based violence, but also to expose talent. As Margaret has mentioned, that some of the kids that joined from 2021, they have upgraded to a film industry, and some are also embarking on YouTube channels. They're doing YouTube channels. They finally discovering what their purpose is. So if the government could like really give us a chance to do for this thing, and you know, try to direct funding to this and other people with deep pockets who are willing to help, this could be a great help for the community. And it couldn't be Delft only, but
to expand
for Western Cape or South Africa as a large, you know, for us to do these programs, you know. So it's exposing talent, doing awareness, which is we are shooting two birds with one stone,
Yeah.
which is very
And
impactful.
therapy and counseling.
Therapy and
You know,
counseling
it's
at the same
therapeutic.
Leadership development.
Yes.
We're running out of time and I still need to get to. So I want to say two things. You know, I totally get where you're coming from. I've had shows here already where we spoke about youth and we spoke about youth development. I come from Kensington, which is a very small suburb. But I often said there was nothing for us to do, you know. And a lot of what we did, and I've said on the show before, is like as teenagers we were in high school, we drank. You know, I did a show on alcohol where they spoke about how cheap alcohol is and how it becomes a recreational activity for young people because there is nothing else for them to do. And so I just, you know, I wanted to throw that in there to say why it's important for us to have these programs and move it out and spread it out across different communities because kids don't have anything to do, which is breeding ground for alcohol and drug abuse, but also for violence. You said something, you spoke about investment. Right, so Marguerite, I mean, I know what's happening in South Africa from a budget perspective is not doing great, and we've seen that there are a lot of budget cuts coming to a lot of organizations, many dealing with gender-based violence and other forms of violence, and I know the Trauma Center has not been exempt from that. So, you know, how is this going to affect your ability to do programming to provide both responsive services like counseling, but also preventative services like the play?
So most of our salaries is from subsidy from Department of Social Development and predominantly the victim empowerment because we have a strong focus on gender-based violence and that the subsidy has been expanded in the last few years. And we've heard now from 1st of April, none of that funding is guaranteed. So it will have a big impact on the work we do. So we do mostly counseling and training through that funding, but if we can get people to help us fill that gap so that we can do more prevention work with the counseling, more training, that would be amazing. And if you can visit our organization website, www.traumacenter.org.za, it's easy, and see if you're able to support us. We would be so grateful, and it will go a long way. It's not only about our livelihoods, but we impact on so many people. And actually, we need to grow the work that we do. We shouldn't be here fighting for us to sustain what we're currently doing. Yeah. We need to expand. There's a lot to be done.
Especially with such an organization that's got such a long legacy of creating a non-violent society. Yes. So let me just say that was traumacenter.org.za is the website, yes. And you're on social media, I know, on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Trauma Center 1, Center CENTRE. Yeah, the British spelling. And then also Twitter @Trauma Center. And you can look us up on Facebook. We use our long name there, the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. That explains where we come from and what we do. So yeah, please visit us and become part of the family and just to support us. If you don't, it's not only about money, it's also about connections and linking us with people who can help us and just show your support. We need that in a big way.
I mean, and so you have the details, and that's also if you need to get hold of the Trauma Center. Marguerite, just I want to say, you know, the Trauma Center has its office in Woodstock, but it also operates in which other areas?
Delft, Manenberg, Kraaifontein, Bonteheuwel, Bishop Leyvers, Langa, Nyanga, Belhar. So we're quite widespread, and we are, I would say, we are serving those communities who don't always get all the attention. Yeah. They don't get the attention like communities like Khayelitsha and Mitchell's Plain gets. But there are also a lot of help needed. So we are very proudly active on the ground. Social workers are out in the field 4 out of the 5 days of the week. So.
Thank you, Marguerite. I'm so sorry we are out of time, but this has been a great conversation. I mean, I really want to applaud the work that you're doing, and if anybody out there can help, we've got traumacenter.org.za and look them up on social media. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lenina. We're so honored to be here. It's such a wonderful space. Thank you for what you're doing for our communities as well.
Oh, thank you. And so we are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching the Womxn Show, and we've been having a great conversation with the Trauma Center for Survivors of Violence and Torture. Now, we're almost at the end of our hour together, but before we go, we are going to play some footage from the drama production by the Trauma Center that they are producing in the Delft Community. It is done by youth, for youth and communities. Let's have a look.
I was on duty that day. The day Miriam stormed into the police station looking disorientated. She was walking slowly and screaming, "I have been raped." The brigadier assigned her case to me. I had to take down her statement. In a way, talking to another woman provided her with some comfort. We sat down in the interrogation room and she told me everything that happened. As soon as she finished narrating her story, I was in tears. I cried because nobody deserved to go through what Miriam experienced. I cried because even though she remembered everything, I still couldn't promise her justice. Because reality is, in cases like Miriam's, very few make it to court, making it hard to get a guilty verdict. See the little bit of hope she had fading away. Even the DNA found in her body wouldn't help if they don't find a match. Suddenly, I felt so useless. Nothing I could say would erase the sorrow and pain. And then I realized, prevention is better than cure. Dear men, do not rape.
Having inside feeling my head when I'm trying to stand up, after having my breath standing up, trying to run away from you, screaming and yelling at you. Suddenly, my body surrenders to my soul. I cry feeling helpless. Every time I think about those days, a thunderstorm immediately appears. I cry to you, begging you, thinking you would stop. Looked into your eyes. All I saw was evil. All I saw was a monster, a determined person to tread havoc. Then I said, "Dear God, please save me and protect my soul." The troubling pain in my head. Every day before I go to you, I see a face. I remember your deep laughter. I still remember even your skull. My story is set unique. It's the story of an ordinary woman who was subject to negative social norms that perpetuated this violence. Yes! Yes! I have healed. Oh, you would be very hard for me to believe what you did to me.
We watched them on television, wearing expensive suits, driving expensive cars, going to the most expensive restaurants, probably even forgetting that we put them there. First of November has come and gone and we'll never see them again. But the doors of hope will be open. We hope for an abuse-free society. This generation of ours will never keep quiet and will never accept abuse of the norm in our community. We will fight right until the end. And Trauma Center will provide what others have promised. Thanks to you, I mean you and you, for giving us what we have not promised and obliged. But out of your kindness and open hearts, may God bless you and give you more, so that you can also get and give one to the most deserving people in our community. And remember, our society is us.
That was some video footage from the drama production by the Trauma Center on gender-based violence. And that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lenina Rasool. Goodbye.